Hey there, it's Gabrielle Nicolay from SpeechKids and Raising Orchid Kids, where we teach little kids to talk and help parents understand their little kids on one side and the other. And today I'm delighted to have Shawn. You know what? I don't know how to pronounce your last name. Tell me.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. Leis.
Leis. I have Shawn Leis here, who is a pediatric physical therapist. So Shawn, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And tell the good folks a little bit about your background and what's going on.
All right. So I'm a pediatric physical therapist. I am also the owner of Little Feet Therapy. We are pediatric PT and OT. But like I said, I'm a PT. So I have been in pediatrics for over 10 years of my career. I started off in adults and got bored quickly, and kids are just a lot more fun. So I've spent over 10 years now working with kids, working in all ages from 0 to 18 and all sorts of diagnoses.
And your practice originally is in North Carolina, is that right?
Yeah, so I started the practice when I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina. So we have a location there still. Also have some therapists working out in Raleigh. And then I recently moved to DC. So just starting up in DC area.
Woo-hoo! And we're happy to have you because today we are going to, and some of this is, we'll get into it in a second, but there are some regional differences in how PT and OT, so that's occupational therapy and physical therapy, are perceived, like what their jobs are. And so DC, I've been made to understand, is kind of a funny place in that way. I think our discussion is gonna be interesting for people outside the DC area as well, because we're going to talk about sort of like, when do we do OT and when do we do PT, and maybe sometimes those overlap. Yeah.
Yeah. And we work together really well and easily. It's usually beneficial for kids to have it all.
Yes. Also speech.
Yeah, I know, that's what I mean. Putting it all together, usually the kids get so much improvement so quickly that way.
So tell me, okay, so just like give me your angle on this, like, because I'm in the business of referring out to, various professionals. And anytime a child comes to me with a speech and language issue, I'm immediately looking at the body, which we absolutely should be doing, because what we see in the mouth is what we have in the body, and vice versa. And so we want to be mindful of that. But so like, how, I guess I'm asking for like, what's your framework overall for that?
What do you mean by that?
I'm so glad you asked. Okay. Like, what kinds of stuff, what kinds of things are best suited for physical therapy, and what kind of things are best suited for occupational therapy?
Okay, there we go. Yeah. So a general statement would be that like physical therapy does gross motor, which are big body movements. So that is like, you're starting as a baby, even with like sitting up on their own and rolling and crawling and pulling the stand and then walking. And as they get older, they're running, jumping, and just that coordination of like, like alternating feet going up and down stairs and catching a ball. Those sort of things are more PT. OT then tends to do more fine motor. So it's fine motor, and occupational therapy in its name is occupation. And so the child's occupation is to play, to do schoolwork, to do, whatever activities a child wants to be doing, essentially. So that's kind of that. And when it gets more towards there, it's kind of where it overlaps. But so to start off, it's like OTs do work as fine motor with those things I always say are like, the small stuff with your hands. So anything as when they're little, it's even like reaching for their rattles, picking up their little Cheerios, holding their own bottle, anything that involves their hands, really. And then as they get older, it turns into handwriting. And then even, whatever else, getting dressed, all of those sorts of things that you're wanting the kids to do, toileting, taking care of themselves in that sense, all that stuff.
ADLs.
Exactly. Yeah.
Activities of daily living. Okay.
Yeah.
But there is a huge part in the middle somewhere, or I don't know, there's a huge part of early childhood intervention that involves the sensory systems. And so let's dig in there a little bit, because many of the kids are doing fine in terms of fine motor. They may even be doing sort of fine in terms of gross motor, but there's this like piece in the middle. So we're talking about sensory processing. We're talking about balance. We're talking about your sense of your body in space, proprioception. Give me some more.
Yeah. So the sensory system itself has, the major components of it will involve auditory. So that's your hearing, will involve gustatory, which is taste, will involve, olfactory for smell, involves your vision, involves vestibular, which I think people don't hear as often is it's as an adult, it's like, when you stand up too quickly and get dizzy.
Yeah.
That's your vestibular system. So if that's off, then the kids are, kind of off, because if you stand up too quickly, you feel off. And then proprioception is where, the nerves into your joints and kind of telling you where your body is in space. I think I covered them all.
Those are the big.
I should have written this down, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and interoception for like knowing like your own thirst and hunger and that stuff. So it's like it's almost flipped, and that whole area kind of lives in between PT and OT and the word sensory. But in that, it kind of gets split in half then of like what part of sensory goes OT and what part kind of goes PT.
Okay, so which part of sensory, because this is going to be news to people, and this was news to me at the time, which part of sensory goes to physical therapy?
So physical therapy would be proprioception, which oftentimes is balance. You'll see kids with poor balance, and with the clumsy kids and that stuff with proprioception. I also vestibular. That one can go either way. I've always done it as PT. In PT school, when we work with adults, we work with vertigo. And even as an adult now, if you have vertigo, you're typically referred to a PT, because we work with the inner ear. So that part of the sensory system, which I think sometimes it gets a little confused of where to go with that can go PT. It can also go OT, kind of depending on what the kid is looking for. But yeah, so it's the main part of sensory for PT tends to be that balance, proprioception, where their body is in space. And I'm blanking on what I said
balance and where you are in space.
Yeah,
those are the big ones.
Yeah, it's like those big ones. And a lot of times it ends up being the kids who are kind of like seeking some input because they're looking for that proprioceptive input.
Well, and that's so interesting, right? Seeking input is like very much of an occupational therapy phrase, right, in like the world, in the world of early intervention anyway, right? And so I do think it's worth kind of repeating like the big five, taste, smell, touch, vision, hearing. I call those the big five, very firmly in OT, in occupational therapy. But then there are these movement pieces, again, where you've got to balance and challenge your body against gravity, which an occupational therapist also works on.
Right.
Right. And so, but then you get a slightly different perspective when we're talking about physical therapy. Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of what it is. That's a different perspective, but where the OT is very in tune with what the body's feeling and what they're looking for and kind of how to soothe that. But sometimes those kids who you hear the word that they're seeking, and they're the very active kids, and they just want to be jumping all over the place. And a lot of times it's because they don't physically have that strength inside themselves to give themselves that proprio input. So they could bounce up and down all day, but it won't it won't satisfy what they're looking for.
Okay, let's talk about this, because this was fascinating to me when I first learned it, which is in order to sit up, let's start there. Because the bouncers and the movers are the kids who can't actually sit up, right? They're so unstable. So in order for us to be doing what we're doing now, which is like sitting upright in a chair, stationary mostly, what has to be happening? What's normal? What do we expect?
So the very first thing I would say too with that is to make sure that you're giving them what they need in terms of their body positioning. I think that's one thing that will get overlooked a lot, even in classrooms. And it's honestly, I think, a person's job a lot of times in offices to be like the ergonomics person who comes around to make sure your biomechanics are okay at your desk, right? So it's the same thing with the kids a lot of times, that sometimes it's a tiny child and their feet don't touch the floor. then that's a whole issue in itself. But yeah, so the first thing to look at is to have the right alignment. So you want them sitting up, to have them sitting up nice and tall. You're going to want them to have a 90-degree bend at their hip, a 90-degree bend at their knee, and a 90-degree bend at their ankle.
So
If
think
they
of
don't
a
have that,
figure in a chair.
yeah,
That's how I usually
pretty much
put it.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you don't have that, you have no base to even work on trying to sit up straight. You're just,
And this is important
battle.
because parents are often complaining, no, but they're often stressed because, for example, kids don't sit at the dinner table. Those same kids' feet are often dangling.
Right.
And then, right, you're basically forcing somebody to be moving around a lot so that they can remain upright. Okay, so positioning matters hugely. What else?
Right. Positioning matters a whole bunch. And then core strength. And your core strength, which is a word that gets kind of tossed around out there a lot. And that includes your hips, your abdominal muscles, your shoulder blade muscles. It's that whole and everything in between your legs and head, essentially, that's helping you sit up straight.
Mm-hmm. And tell me about how the muscle could go into the muscle contraction, flexion, whatever that is, because my understanding is when kids are moving around is because they cannot sort of work their postural muscles the way that they're supposed to be able to.
So your postural muscles are supposed to be essentially endurance muscles, that they're holding this isometric contraction just to hold you in one spot. And they've got to do it for a long time. So you've got to work on the endurance of those muscles. And it's not like, even doing a sit-up, you're not going to strengthen that because you're not wanting yourself to just, come forward and bend. You're holding a position. It's, holding your arm out even for an extended amount of time. It gets tired real quick. So you just need those muscles to last a whole lot longer and hold a stationary position.
And it's something that, because this is also something that parents come with a lot, which is they're really strong. Like my child is very strong. They climb, they run, they do all the things, but they can't sit still. Does that make sense?
It makes a ton of sense. And a lot of times, there's a climbing one, right? You'll be like, they can climb, they can jump, they can do all these things. And a lot of times they can. And kids, anyone finds that if there's a will, there's a way type of thing. And momentum and using that is a magical thing. You just get going and you can go, especially with climbing and, swinging across the monkey bars or something. You just get that momentum and you're going. So you're really not using too much muscle strength a lot of times when they are climbing or jumping or running or anything like that.
Let's talk about momentum versus, you tell me if this is right, momentum versus graded movement. That's really what you're talking about here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so explain graded movement for all of us.
So that is more of a controlled, purposeful movement where you're essentially telling your muscles to contract to perform a task. Whereas using momentum, it's so hard. I don't even know how to put it into words.
I know, right?
It's like it's swinging on yourself. You're swinging on that bar and you're just flying and you're going back and forth and letting your body carry you, and really not doing much. You're just letting physics do its job, essentially.
Right. Yeah. And so I just want to make this really clear for parents. Yes, children can be strong, but they can be pushing through without a sense for how much force is actually required for the task. They're either doing no force or all the force, and they're not doing anything in between, which is why as soon as they try to do something that requires control, they're spilling, they're tripping, right?
Yeah. Because they're not, if they're not telling their body to make that contraction and hold it, to hold a cup and walk.
Yeah. Right.
They can't, their muscles just don't either receive that information correctly. There's sometimes that issue where maybe, the brain body connection isn't totally functioning properly, which happens a lot with coordination issues. Or it might just be that the muscle strength isn't completely there. but they appear strong. Or I mean, sometimes too, especially with those kids who's having a tantrum and they are like the strongest child, you know, it's like, it's a Hulk syndrome, you know, you're angry and you can punch a hole in that wall.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah.
But
so,
but
yeah.
but consciously to do emotion, it just isn't there. There's some disconnect.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you're talking about sort of like a dyspraxia or an apraxia.
Yeah.
Huh. Why does that happen? I mean, I always say I don't know, so I'm just asking the question in case you
like
know.
why it's like,
Yeah, why does apraxia happen?
you know, I don't know, other than like, you know, the disconnect between brain body.
Yeah.
I mean,
kind of,
I think I don't even know if a neurologist really knows.
okay. Yeah. I mean, listen, I just like to
I
check.
feel like it gets all the way down to that level of like, I don't know, is it like not myelinated enough in their nervous system? I don't know.
Right. Yeah, you're right. Because there's no site particularly in the kids we see, right? In the pediatric realm where things are going well generally until a certain age. And then we're getting this disconnect where we expect development to be continuing and it's not. It's kind of diverging a little bit. We don't know. There's a glitch somewhere in the system. And it manifests the way it manifests, either because kiddo's not talking or kiddo's not walking up the stairs, single timing it, or not. Well, yeah. So you tell me, when families come to you, what's the presenting complaint? For example, I know it's a lot.
There's so many.
I know. Pick one.
Pick one. We'll pick one. We'll stay on this topic. So, I mean, with this topic, a lot of times it'll be, you know, they're falling a lot.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You know, and it usually comes to a head of like, yeah, they've, you know, bumped their head 3 times. We ended up in the ER, and now we realize there's an issue. You know, something like that.
Okay.
When it's a balance, it usually gets to the point of like injury a lot for the family to realize that it's more of a problem than like, oh, they're just a clumsy kid.
Yeah. Right.
Where like what people identify as clumsy with just walking should end at like 2, essentially. Mm-hmm. You know, once a kid reaches, you know, 2.5 is when then their gait should be developing to a mature gait, and they shouldn't have that clumsy, stompy walking, bumping into things.
Feet should be close together, not wide.
Right. And like pushing off on your toes, having arms swinging.
I often see kids who are walking like this,
mm-hmm.
holding on to sometimes 2 things. What's going on there?
That's their nervous system trying to honestly just like work. It's giving themselves input. It's giving themselves something to hold steady. It's bracing, essentially. Mm-hmm. That if you brace up in one part, then you can kind of start triggering those other muscles to start going. Which it works. That's one of the things about how you said, it's like they just power through it and they seem like they're fine.
But then again, correct me if I'm wrong, this pattern is not the pattern that we want. And so then over time, like that's a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Because you can't, I mean, what are you going to do out, right? You walk around like this all the time. You know, like, especially these are the kids who will walk with their arms really close in, are the kids who probably can't walk holding their cups.
Yeah. Right.
Because they don't have that ability to essentially kind of like multitask. Mm-hmm. You know, ask one part of it's, you know, creating that differentiation in your body to be able to hold steady with your arm while you're walking your leg.
And so therapy for that looks like what?
So therapy like that for that, you know, would be physical therapy, and you'd be working a lot on a lot of trunk strength, a lot of doing stuff, a lot of segmented movements, kind of like twisting, having arms go one way, like, you know, while your body stays stationary, working on doing kind of 2 things at once in a way, where you might have them reaching up for something high and then, you know, lifting up and tapping their knee. So like it's going across their body, getting, you know, that cross coordination, kind of breaking that pattern of having to hold still in some spot while your other body's working.
Okay. And then you're doing that through play, through how?
Yeah, I don't want to speak for everyone, but personally, I always do it through play. So a lot of times a parent will look at what I'm doing and think that we're just playing, which we are. But it's purposeful. It's, it's purposeful play. It's, I'll put the squig up on the mirror and tell them to drop it down in the bucket that's on the other side of their foot or something.
Okay.
And stuff like that. So yeah, it looks like play, but it's guided and it's having them do the tasks that make sense. But if you don't make it fun, the kids aren't going to do it. It's hard. I mean, it's hard. It's working out. It's hard.
Calisthenics for toddlers. So sometimes parents want, like, they want to do exercises. And I think I want to take this opportunity to just reiterate, like, reaching up for something and putting it down into a bucket. Yes, that's part of it. But the therapist is also providing support as needed to make sure that the child is using the right muscles and the right postures and the right movements. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when I'm working with the children, I don't have, until they kind of like master, but not fully master, but are able to make that coordinated movement to then make it turn into more of a strengthening exercise is when I would send it home to parents. Because if they start doing these, exercises, guided play, I feel like a lot of people just find things off the internet and be like, well, they're not doing this, and the internet told me to do X, Y, and Z with this activity, but they're probably going to be doing that activity in poor alignment, and then you're just reinforcing that bad pattern.
Right. And this is huge. This is really important. I mean, I have a 7-year-old client that I'm working with, and I was like, do not practice mistakes. You've been practicing you've been practicing mistakes your whole life. We're not doing that here.
Right.
Right. And same goes for these larger movements, even more so. Right. So we want to make sure that the body is moving, using the muscles that it's meant to, and establishing those new patterns so that we can get to the next level. Because the other thing is, lots of times what got them to where they are was good enough, but now it's not anymore.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so kind of have to go back and correct some of those things sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm sure you see that too a lot with them saying, say a word over and over again, but you're training them how to move their mouth muscles so they say it right. So it's just, it's the same thing. It's like, yeah, they can squat down all day, but if they're not, if their feet are turning in, if their knees are hitting each other, you're not going to get anything accomplished.
Yeah. Okay.
And
So
sure, they can do the movement, but it won't help them for, like you said, it won't help them for that later.
Right. Yeah. Quality matters, right?
Yeah.
What age kiddos are you working with?
I am working with all ages of kiddos. So as young as like essentially 2 months, sometimes younger for like a kiddo with torticollis, or a flattening of the head, but typically around like 4 months is when we'll start working on rolling. And then I've seen kids into their 20s too, if they're children with developmental type diagnoses.
Okay. And if people want to get a hold of you, how did they do that?
They can visit my website. Is probably the best way.
Yeah.
So what should I tell people?
What is your website?
My website is littlefeettherapy.com. Should I give them my email address? Is that something you do?
No, they'll go to the website. It's fine.
Okay. I'm like, I don't know. Where are you gonna find me? Give me my home address. Come visit.
littlefeettherapy.com. Perfect. Hey, Shawn, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
We'll take you to see you next time.
All right.